Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, we've all sort of known for a long time that the Void as a source of light is powerful, but for the longest time it's also been the hardest source of light to understand. Of all the three elements, it's a little bit trickier to define than, electricity and, that's fire. This season's new exotic for Warlocks, the Briarbinds, brings up yet another persistent and interesting point, which is that sometimes, where the Void is concerned, there are hints that things within it are alive. The living, sentient things within the Void is a kind of concept and topic of lore that I wanted to discuss and explore today, because there are some fascinating implications about the power and reality of such an empty unreality. Nothing concrete can ever be confirmed about such a place, but we can most definitely infer a few things, and from those findings, we can discuss and maybe come to a vague consensus of what is going on. But first, guys, gals, and all my other pals, check this out. Lore Daddy Lemonade. We have our own flavor with Advanced GG. I've already spoken a ton about Advanced GG, and I'm sure all of you know about it anyway at this point, but hey, we have our own flavor. It's finally official. So if you're looking to grab my flavor, go right ahead to the link in the description. Advanced GG is great for keeping your energy levels high while gaming, and it's a nice, steady energy bump, not some short-lived high that immediately then crashes. Also, be sure to keep an eye out for more Advanced GG stuff to come in the future. There's a lot more exciting things that are on the horizon. Thanks to Advanced GG for sponsoring this video. You can find the link down below in the description to get a discount on any of your purchases. So before we dive in, I think we need to acknowledge that the Void as a topic is one of the oldest concepts in Destiny. It has lore that goes all the way back to Destiny 1 Vanilla, and even as recently as this season, Season of the Witch, it's getting new stuff being added in there. So yeah, lots of it may have evolved, some of it will have changed, and the Void is also a vague and tough concept to explain in the first place. So I think that might actually be the best place to start, which is to kind of explain what the Void really is. Because you know what? It's very hard to understand what the Void is in the first place as a source of light, but in order to understand it, I think you need to look at not only the oldest, but also some of the newest lore on the Void. So we're going to go ahead and do that, looking at three sources. First of all, we're going to look at the literal Void Grimoire card, possibly the oldest source of lore on Void light in Destiny. It reads, "The universe is defined by fundamental forces. Beneath the world of light and matter lies the vacuum, and the vast dark secrets it contains. In the understanding of this vacuum lies the secret of a Void light." That quote gives us the beginning of a thesis, but I think it's better expanded by two more sources that give us the ability to create a more practical understanding of it. Both are core lore about Voidwalkers. The first is the original Voidwalker Grimoire card, and the second is the Voidwalker lore tab that was updated in Witch Queen, where all the new subclasses started to receive new lore tabs. This, again, is from the Voidwalker, and it's from the second of those lore tabs to exist in Destiny 2. Thank goodness that places like Ishtar have preserved both versions. I'll go through the old Grimoire first, but it's worth pointing them both out because again, they help us form that fundamental thesis. The Grimoire card reads as follows. "The Traveller came out of the void that surrounds all things. Thus we know that the void is full of power. Thus we enter the void without fear. Small minds will call your abilities blasphemous. They will compare you to the abominable wizards of the Hive. But you will not be held back. Gifted with the Traveller's light, armed with the secret physics of a lost age, you will tear reality asunder. You will fear nothing, and nothing will not fear you." And finally, the lore tab for the Voidwalker as it was updated in Witch Queen with Void 3.0. "The space between defines the shapes, the rest before the note, the breath before the word, the blank space on the page." A chill hit the air, and I looked up from my studies. There was a stillness, an uneasy calm before the storm. An ambush awaited me, of that I was certain. No time to wonder how my defenses had failed, no time to ponder how they had found my hidden library in the first place. I had only just lifted my eyes from those insightful words on the Void. Now I'd have to take my first steps upon it and hope I didn't fall right through. "Seize her!" the lead marauder thundered. Through every window crashed enemies intent on my destruction. Time stretched out before me. With a thought, I was at the center of the fray. A gaping celestial maw drained the life from them. I found my footing. The power of the void was manifest, yet this was not its full nature. The next instant, reality snapped back into its traditional rhythm. I was alone once more. The intruders didn't even have time to comprehend their fate. I was barely more enlightened than they were, yet I had gleaned one fundamental truth. A step upon the void is a step upon that nothing which can bear the weight. So, with all of this, I think we can start to understand the big picture of what the void truly is. And there is one last finding that I would throw everyone's attention to, which is the distinction that Osiris makes between the light and the dark, which is simply that the light is a thing of the physical world, whereas the dark is something to do with emotion, consciousness, and thought. And we'll come back to that distinction later, but it's upon this that I think we can start to build an analogy for what the void is. Let's go ahead and say that I take a battery, some dirt, and a box of matches, and I put them inside a chest. If I asked you what the contents of the chest were, you might logically point out the 3 items that I'd just put within it. And you'd be somewhat correct. However, to understand what the void is, I believe you have to count the air and the gaps between the objects in the chest as a part of its contents. In this analogy, the chest is the universe and the bounds of it, which may be infinite, and that's where this analogy starts to break down, but I think this way it's much more easily visualized. The mound of dirt represents physical matter, such as that which makes up planets and people. The battery represents arc light, and the matches represent solar light. But the air inside the chest, which is between all the items, also represents something in this analogy. It is a representation of the vacuum between physical matter, and that vacuum, in this analogy, is also a part of the universe, just like all other types of light are. In this instance, you need to understand the literal void of space, not space as in out there in the stars, but any empty space is the void, a nothingness defined by the existence of the physical universe as a whole. Now, for just a second, as we come to that analogy, I want to go ahead and pause, because I think that there are 2 tangents that we need to explain about the void. First of all is the note on darkness that I mentioned earlier, and the second is a longer explanation about the 9. Some of you might be asking about what the difference is between the void and the darkness, and it's here that I'd point out that the darkness is a thing of thought and emotion and consciousness. It is metaphysical in terms of the space that it occupies, that being the space of the mind. The void is a power within the bounds of the physical universe itself. It just expresses the things that are not there. The void is not darkness because the void and the darkness come from different sources. The void is external, built of the physical universe, or perhaps the lack thereof it. Strand and stasis and darkness powers generally, perhaps even including the resonance powers of the disciples, are formed of thought and consciousness. So no, they're not the same. Secondly, some of the other lore junkies amongst you may be at this moment pointing out that the description of the void that I just gave is fairly similar to that of the 9. And the 9 in the lore are essentially sentient dark matter, given form and personality by the existence of matter and living things. It forms a sort of inverse shadow which the 9 are shaped by. And there may be questions as to, well, do the 9 have some kind of connection to the void then? And to this, I'd simply have to say, it does sound similar. The 9 are a weird concept in their entirety, and I think that if we're going to do a proper investigation into them at a later date, we should try our best to see if we can link them into the void. It could be that their presence of dark matter isn't truly the void, because dark matter isn't necessarily the absence of something, it isn't the true void. And that might be true, but it could be that they are actually a part of it. The reality at the moment is, I don't think that in my investigations I found enough concrete evidence of one thing over the other, so I'd need to look a little bit harder and take another gander at everything. but I didn't want to answer that question just for today. I'd also be remiss for not mentioning a few things about the Nine that are related potentially to the Void. This is something that came up years ago. There's a radio message that I mentioned many years ago in a video that might have come from the emissary of the Nine. I am, however, only mentioning them in this instance to state that a lot of theory and old bits of dialogue within are still speculative and potentially inaccurate, so I don't want to enter those into concrete fact. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about though, I'll at least give you the context. From way back in the day, at Destiny 2's vanilla release, there were radio messages you could pick up by sitting in a landing zone. Most of them were pretty mundane. Things like, oh, I'm tracking a Red Legion squad moving on your position. Wait, no, they've turned around. Proceed to get the civilians out. But then, there's this one, which kind of comes out of nowhere.
I am the door. I open onto the void. One day the Masters will step through, and then you will know.
I am the door, I open unto the void. One day the Masters will step through, and then you will know? Thank goodness Destiny Lore Vault is so good at preserving all these lines of dialogue. The implication here is that if this is the emissary's voice, that the emissary is kind of a communicative figure between the Nine and the world that they're trying to communicate with, and that the Nine are indeed within the void. Again, I think that if this is true, it's something that expands on everything, but we don't know for certain that that's the emissary's voice. To be brutally honest, we also just don't have enough confirmation of the emissary's place in things when it comes to the actual relationship to the Void, specifically. Whilst it is very clear that she was made as a means of communicating between the Nine and those within physical reality, I don't necessarily think that there's exactly enough credence to the ideas of, well, yes, they are absolutely made of Void stuff. I think we'd need to have that explicitly stated somewhere, and maybe it is and maybe I've just missed it. Even if the Nine aren't related to the Void and this is all just spinfoil, I think they still stand as a really compelling point of proof that even if there is nothing there, there's still potentially power within the nothingness. Even the original Void Walker Grimoire card implies this when it says that the Traveler came out of the Void, therefore we know that it is full of power. But the power within the Void alone doesn't necessarily mean that there's life out there, right? This is what we're going to need to dive into now that we're done with our little tangents about the Nine and darkness. For the purposes of not confusing it all, I wanted to make a point of separating any discussion of the Nine from this question. Interestingly though, even if we do separate the Nine out, we do find a few hints that there is potentially something, at very least, alive within the Void. We need only look to one of the new Warlock aspects that I imagine everyone has been begging me to talk about for a long time, despite the lack of there being a lot of lore about it, and that would be the Child of the Old Gods. Really quickly, this is the brief in-game description of the aspect. In the deepest reaches, a pact made between unknowable entities created something from nothing. It lives on. So yeah, this seems to pretty clearly acknowledge that within the deepest reaches of the Void, there are unknowable entities that exist and that created something from nothing, and that something still exists, it still lives on. That something, being called the Child of the Old Gods, renders further questions, of course. Who are these old gods and just how powerful are they? If the Traveler came out of the Void, are they somewhere on that similar power scale? How long ago was this Child of the Old Gods created? Is the fact that it lives on remarkable in some fashion? Do things generally not live on? And, I mean, is all of this just a bit of a metaphor? After all, there isn't any proof of the Child of the Old Gods being sentient or anything, or capable of some kind of behaviors, are there? Enter Briarbines, which is the new Warlock exotic from this season, and it was really the impetus for this entire video. It gives us the ability to pick up our old Void Souls that we deploy on the field and redeploy them. The lore tab seems to indicate something more about the nature of Void Souls that implies that there's something to them, something alive. At very least in a sense that we as humans understand it to be. The lore tab reads as follows. New growth rises from the old. The vines coiled and twisted up her arm, blooming their deep purple as they settled over her glove. She flexed her fingers and felt the thorns at her wrist. The thralls ran towards her, their claws outstretched. Her void soul shimmered into being as she stood her ground. She fired her weapon, and the void soul fluttered towards them, reaching out with its dark web of light as it weakened and drained the life from the thralls. They fell one after another. Then the acolytes advanced. She sprinted towards the void soul. The delicate tendrils on her glove unfurled. She could feel the faint call, the scent, the color that drew the eye. The void soul was drawn to her as she to it. She raised her weapon and fired again. So the last few lines are vague and a little nondescript, but the idea of the Guardian being drawn to her void soul as it was drawn to her is a concept worth exploring just for a little bit based on the lines from earlier. The Guardian feels a faint call from her void soul. Now, it does seem a little bit hard to define whether that constitutes life or not, but maybe that's appropriate for the spawn of an unknowable void entity. Either way, the void soul is reactive to its guardian and is drawn to her in cooperation. Now, normally, as any warlock will know, a void soul fizzles out. Perhaps the Briar Binds are the key here. They don't so much bind the void soul to the guardian, so much as they open up the opportunity for it to persist beyond its expected expiration. If that assumption is correct, then the idea of the void soul being drawn to the guardian might imply that it has at least the most basic of survival instincts, and at most, a will of its own, with choices and preferences. Even if those preferences are simply, I would prefer to continue existing rather than not exist, or I would prefer to continue to feed on the enemies before you rather than to fizzle out. There is one aspect to this question that's worth expanding on further, which is the relationship between the void and death. And the reason I bring that up is because death and life are seen as binaries to each other, so understanding the relationship between the void and death can maybe tell us a little bit more about the nature of the void, and maybe it provides clues. When it comes to the void and death, there is one exotic that I remember in particular, the Mask of the Quiet One. This Titan exotic tells us a little more about the studies of a Titan who is obsessed with the notions and mechanics of death, and how it might better be utilized. Take a listen to what they had to say. Must you all be so dark? You're too focused on the horns. Look, I have died hundreds of times hunting the shadowed killers in Murder Row. I spent years mulling over Toland's and Osiris's discourse on Thanatonautics. I have dabbled a bit myself, and I saw what lingers immediately upon all death. What I have done is found a way to channel the void to draw that essence in before it is lost to the ether, to return it to light, so it can be properly bestowed back on our enemies. Death does not need to be final. It can, in fact, be recycled. What's so dark about that? Satomi, architect of the mask. The implication here is that there is energy within a being that is lost to the ether upon their death. I believe that's ether with a lowercase e as opposed to ether with an uppercase. No, therefore this is not the same ether as what is consumed by the fallen, or created by their servitors. The point is that whatever is lost to the ether can instead be channeled by or through the void. That energy can be redirected and reused as a source of power against our enemies. Crucially, this makes the distinction between the void and the ether that life is seemingly lost to upon death. In a video from a very long time ago, I noted that perhaps the void was a bridge between life and death, between the realms of the living and the dead. I don't think I'm so brave with that assertion now. Perhaps my understanding of the lore is a little bit more nuanced, perhaps it isn't, and I'm just changing my opinion. Either way, it's clear that the void isn't actually a part of where things go to die. It isn't where the ether disappears to. Perhaps it's adjacent, but it is not death. It is a vacuum within which things can be cycled and harnessed, perhaps, but it is not where things go after they have died. If the void is not the domain of things that are dead, then perhaps it is a place where things might at least try to live. Perhaps that alone is enough to confirm the idea that it is possible for life, however strange and unknowable, to exist within the void. I don't believe that the void itself as a whole is alive, but I do believe that there are powers within the void that are well beyond any of us and what we might know. Even the idea of comprehending the void is tricky, so how does one comprehend a being that exists in nothingness? Suffice to say, I'm not keen to meet the progenitors of the child of the old gods anytime soon. The Traveler came out of the void. We know that power lies within it as a result. But how much power is still there? And who holds it? The Traveler might have been good, or at least might have been inclined to assist us, but we now know that the light is something that is not bound to moral binaries of good and evil. I fear that whatever lurks within the void might in fact be something that is completely amoral, something that doesn't care. Above all, if there's one thing that warlock aspects and the very verbiage of the void seems to teach us about the nature of the void, it's this. It's hungry. If it is alive, or if anything within it is alive, I imagine that its first instinct would indeed be to devour. But that last bit is very much speculation, and that is also where our video ends. So I want you guys to let me know in the comments section, is there something to this that I've missed? Is there some piece of evidence of something that is alive within the void, very specifically? Something that is not known to us, not human or guardian or awoken or exo, something that exists and hungers. If there is, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments section. Or, if you don't know of such things within the lore, go ahead and just leave your own thoughts, because you know what, it would be fascinating to simply sit and listen. This is a topic which cuts to the very heart of the identity of void light, and, well, I'd be interested to know your thoughts. If you did enjoy the video though, go ahead and leave a like, and of course remember that you can hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to stay up to date with Destiny's lore. But, as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Per audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.